Good evening, folks. Thank you so much for joining us for Navigating Social Issues in the Classroom and Educator panel. My name is Juanita Montes de Oca. I am from Generation Citizen, and I'm joined here today with some wonderful educators and my colleague who's been working on this project with me, Milena Batnova, from Making Hearing Common. We're really eager to share our findings and our thoughts, and we're going to get this started right away. So over the next hour or so, we'll provide an overview of our project goals. We're going to listen to our panelists' experiences as they've navigated social issues in the classroom. And then we're going to end with an overview of our process and the Educator Toolkit. All participants at the end of the webinar, all participants are going to receive access to the toolkit. So I know you're looking forward to that part. Our organizations, Generation Citizen, Making Hearing Common, and Rural Assembly believe that educators deserve recognition, support, and guidance as stewards of schools' civic mission. We believe that public schools are community anchors where students and all school community stakeholders can learn to engage with each other across their differences. With the generous support of the new Pluralists, our three organizations teamed up to better understand and elevate educators' experiences with obstacles to and best practices for navigating social issues in schools in today's politicized climate. Ultimately, we wanted to recognize, support, and empower educators in their roles as bridge builders with students, administrators, and caregivers. For now, this term bridging, we're going to identify or define it as the intentional effort to understand people as individuals first and to build authentic connections across differences, which include but are not limited to differences by race, politics, and religion. Educators thus play a central role as community bridge builders, which often includes creating spaces for people to listen to differing views and to strive for cognitive dialogue across schisms. Again, here you see this definition on the slide about bridge building, and what we're looking at is educators that facilitate dialogue across differences and help foster positive intergroup relationships. The goals of our project and how we've been able to achieve this is by listening to teachers' experiences and perspectives from 19 different states and various community settings over the course of a year. Given that we were limited and scattered, that there were limited and scattered resources to support teachers in navigating social issues in the classroom, we created a robust resource based on our literature review and the educator focus groups we hosted. We also developed a guiding framework and identified strategies and resources for engaging in courageous conversations. Finally, knowing the responsibility of bridge building is not solely the teachers, we also identified key administrators and caregivers as key stakeholders and provided strategies and resources for engaging with them. After the educator panel, Milena will share the themes we heard from the educators we spoke to and provide an overview of our bridge building framework and the toolkit. Now, I'm really excited to share the space and hand over the mic to two amazing teachers that I've had the honor to work with for several years now. They also contributed directly to the development of the toolkit. This is Kelly Preston, a high school teacher in Brooklyn, New York, and Carrie Furtado, a middle school teacher in Fall River, Massachusetts. I just want to highlight and thank those that did submit questions when you registered for this event. Due to limited time, we've narrowed it down to 4 overarching questions, and we're not going to take questions this evening. Hopefully, a lot of the questions that you have will be answered once you've reviewed the toolkit. But without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over to Kelly and Carrie, who are going to open the discussion with a list of our community norms.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As we jump into this panel, we just want to go over some community norms to keep in mind. So first is to stay engaged. Second is to speak your truth. Third is to maintain confidentiality. As we hear some of the discussions today, we can share the lessons, but keep the names and the stories confidential. Listen respectfully, and then be open-minded. We're here to learn. So for our first question that I have for our panelists, Let's start on a positive note. Please share an example of how you've successfully navigated a social issue discussion in the classroom. Please share the topic, your approach, and the student responses.
Okay, I can go first. I teach at a public charter school here in Baltimore City that's project-based and arts integrated, so I have a little bit more leeway than a traditional teacher. So right now, my students are working on, I teach probability and statistics, but my students are working on box plots of the black butterfly, where we examine hypersegregation and the variances and the effects of redlining and stuff in Baltimore City. And we do that by just looking at housing data and making box plots of it and then studying the history a little bit about it. A lot of students, well, they really enjoy it because it's about their city. It's about where they live. It's practical. It's something they can put their hands on. Their responses have, a lot of it has been either, we knew this, but we didn't know how much it was, or how much it affects us. Because we also looked at different data visualizations of maps, like, socioeconomic status and kindergarten readiness and all these things by neighborhood. So it's been really productive because it is content-based and I can justify how it lends itself to the standard curriculum. And I enjoy it. I'm passionate about it, so that's helpful as well.
Thank you so much, Elena. That's so interesting to hear how kind of these issues can also be discussed in the mathematics classroom, which a lot of people, I think, don't often think about. So thank you for that. Is there another panelist who would like to share? You can go ahead. Yep.
Okay. So my experience is a little bit different, at least for this school year, given that the first semester I was working at like a private school, kind of on the wealthier side of town, versus this semester that I've been working with in a charter school closer to the south side, at least in Santa Fe. And so the south side is usually like demographically, the composition of it is newer immigrants from different parts of Latin America. So the conversations that we've had are different in tone. There's been kind of two main ones. One is what is happening in Israel and Palestine. And in the first school, the challenge was the fact that a lot of the students kind of were invested personally, given that some of the students were of a Jewish faith or had a Middle Eastern background, whereas in in this charter school that I teach now, the conversation is a little bit less, like more disconnected, but we're able to discuss more without, tensions running high within the student body versus the topics that we talk about that the kids are interested in for the charter school, which is immigration and the topic of immigration given our election cycle, which themselves are very personally connected to. And so tensions run high and there's a lot of emotions on that topic in comparison to the school I taught in the fall, which there was a bit of a disconnect. So I noticed that sometimes when they don't make like a personal connection, you could have a little bit more of a discussion because you're looking at the history, you're looking at through like kind of more of a logical lens. Whereas if it's a topic that really hits home, you can still discuss it, but it's harder to really come to a conclusion and to have like a healthier civic engagement with the students.
Yeah, I hear, that's a common theme when kids are personally invested. Sometimes those conversations are a little sometimes challenging to navigate. Does any panelist here have an approach that they've used that's been successful and was positive on navigating a social issue conversation where students may have been more personally invested?
I am not teaching social studies, but I am co-teaching. I'm an ESL teacher in high school, state of Iowa, Storm Lake, a very diverse community. And we have a large influx of students from Latin America. And I see how the teacher who is leading the class, he's a first-year teacher, very young, first-year graduate, how well he's handling these conversations. And the first thing that he set the tone. He said, whatever we're talking about, it's going to be A, respectful, B, based on research. And one thing that he never expresses his own side. The students don't know what side he's taking, which is very helpful. They are trying and poking, and they really want to know what the teacher think about the specific situations. However, I think that's very professional not to tell the students, so that to keep them to be more objective. In that sense, yes, this immigration is a question that is very debatable. However, I really like how he navigates that by simply having them, okay, you are going to do some research and figure out what's out there, what's researched, and not just somebody sat down and wrote an opinion, but pretty much scientific or verified or peer-reviewed opinion. So yeah, I observed him teaching. All I do is pretty much interpret in that class. I'm trying to say what he says in Spanish, but I really appreciate working with him.
Thank you. Yeah, I think common themes we've heard from a lot of people are really setting those boundaries and expectations, having a structure for the conversation, and really grounding it in facts and research. So thank you for that.
Hey, everyone. So looking at some of the data and the statistics, there were a couple of features that were important to bring to the forefront as we're thinking about these conversations. So it may not surprise you that in 2023, the State of the American Teacher found a couple of points of interest. And so about a third of teachers that are in one of 18 states that have some restrictions on how teachers can talk about race and gender in the classroom, but about a half of those teachers reported that they are subject to those state and local statistics. So you have a little bit of your distinction where teachers have some ideas of what they can say, but that's not the case for everyone. And yet, regardless of the presence of state restrictions, more than 80% of teachers who said they were subject to local restrictions decided to limit classroom discussions about political and social issues. And so with that in mind, as you're thinking about your classroom, what are some of the major challenges that you encounter when discussing social issue? Oh my gosh, words are not my friend today. Happy Wednesday, everybody. What are some of the challenges that you face when you are navigating those discussions, thinking about those sticky points in the classroom when when you've got those challenges in front of you? What has come up as a challenge? And then what do you hope with how those challenges are going to get addressed? So for the panelists, this is your question. So I'm going to bring this back. What are some of the major challenges that you've encountered? And then what do you hope for in addressing those challenges?
I'll jump in. I mean, I'm in a southern state, so maybe that's one of the states you're referring to in terms of legislation already in place and legislation that's probably shortly coming. I mean, I think the surprising thing over the last 2 years, most of this legislation was initially framed about race. And, now I think for the most part, it's LGBTQ plus issues. I mean, those become the major moments where you pause, because maybe not per se the students in discussion, but if those discussions go home or somebody's accessing any materials you use that you posted in Google Classroom, that's probably when my principal comes down to talk to me, as that's happened a couple times this year. So I think overall, mean, I don't know if this is exactly a chilling effect, but I do think it is beginning to take things that I would normally not really worry about in terms of introducing into a conversation up until this year. And now I kind of have to stop and really consider what a external group of parents may have to say about anything that I introduce. And I would give one example that I thought was quite interesting. When we were looking at book bans, which of course we pulled a series of articles and something from NPR. And I mean, it was talking, I think, about the general focus of book bans. I don't think it would have been problematic if we were looking at how some of these bans have been focused on race, but just because part of one of the stories that was used focused on an LGBTQ portion of the article, that's what triggered a visit by my principal. So yeah, I mean, I just think that's been an interesting pivot to all of this state law that's kind of affecting what we can or cannot teach in the classroom.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm just curious, do you have any insight or any hopes as far as what you'd like to see, as far as how you would like to see those challenges addressed?
Me?
Sure.
I mean, I don't think in the big picture, and I'm looking at next year. I mean, I think I would like some certainty. I mean, we get a very vague type of description of what we should do in the classroom. So I would like a little bit more, direction, I think, in terms of what we can or cannot teach. I don't know if that's necessarily going to stop me, but I do think, and I think a lot of teachers face this is very vague in the ways that policy is talked about and on these issues related to these state laws or provisos. So I'll say this, I hope somebody else might feels the same way. I mean, we have state standards, and we're looking at government in particular. If I decide that I'm going to introduce this topic because it's the best way to, demonstrate 14th Amendment issues or First Amendment issues, I don't see anything in the law that's prohibiting me from doing that. And so, I'd like to hear administration maybe be a little bit more precise or explicit about how they think these policies should work, because then I think we can actually have a conversation as opposed to just living in a big cloud of vagueness or uncertainty.
Thank you. I'm wondering too, I think you definitely highlighted some important points there with the need for clarity. And I'm wondering if any of our other panelists would like to share some of their experiences or how they would respond to maybe a similar challenging situation in their classroom.
So I don't have the challenge of necessarily parents pushing back in terms of like what's in the state curriculum or what's against the law per se. I teach in Maryland. But being a math teacher, talking about issues like slavery and segregation, and we cover a plethora of topics, and even religion. I like to talk about religious differences because Baltimore City is a religiously diverse city, and people need to understand that. I get a lot of pushback about like, why am I doing it in this particular class? So for me, I lean not only on my content standards, but I like to lean on CASEL standards and social justice standards. I put all those things into my project guides, into my syllabus, into all the work that I'm doing. And when I do projects or things that I know that are going to be touchy, I send home permission slips, basically, or like project guides, basically. So we can have those conversations proactively. Now, does that solve everything? No, because a lot of parents don't even look at them. But then if I do have to have those type of conversations, I can leverage the fact that I proactively let you know what were we discussing, why, where the standards came from, what my motivation was. So if you didn't catch that, then you have to do some reflection on that. But beyond that, like I said, really leaning on those standards. And another thing I was going to say earlier too is this is also where a lot of those making caring common activities come in really well, because even in a content classroom in those first days of school, you want to do those types of deep conversation and listening activities and community building activities, so that down the road, when you're having those tough conversations, you have a classroom culture of good rapport and respect. So I think, and the best time to do them is at the beginning of the year, just with things that are not as touchy, so that you can lay that foundation.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was really helpful. And I think Sharon, did you want to respond to this question? Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to. I took it a little bit different, and I don't know if it's just the nature of what I teach. And so, like someone else on the panel, I work primarily with multilingual learners. And so for me, when I listened to that question, I think someone else said the word clarity, and ensuring clarity is, whether it's an academic topic or social, that is the only lens that I am thinking through. And so when I think about the challenges, it's ensuring, and I mean, I think about comprehensible input and output. And it doesn't matter if, again, where my brain went with the question, it doesn't necessarily matter the topic, but how am I ensuring students, not just who are in my class, I'm the English version, right? I don't teach in a dual language situation. So I have students from all over the place. We've gotten recently, I'm in Colorado, a large influx of new friends from Venezuela and Guatemala, and that is fantastic. But they're coming in with, and they're not meaning to put anyone in one big category, but our newest friends are coming in with different backgrounds than our friends that have been here for 4 months, for 6 months, for 8 months. And so really thinking about whatever topics are happening, whether they're challenging conversations or not, it is my job in the building, and multiple buildings in some cases, is to ensure that in my space and preparing them for the other classrooms where teachers are not necessarily thinking about the language of their content in the way that gives my students access to both understand what's happening and to be able to output their own thoughts in appropriate ways. That becomes really tricky. And so I really thinking about how we're breaking down those linguistic barriers, but also ensure we're not just having Spanish and English in the room, right? Where we have in some classrooms 8, 9, or 10 languages, and some students who don't have anyone to speak with who speaks their first language. How are we ensuring that we are providing the appropriate background knowledge of what students need, not just to enter into the social conversation, but all the amazing academic pieces that are happening in all our classrooms? What does that mean for our multilingual students who, for a variety of reasons, may not be able to yet engage in ways that a typical student might, because of linguistic things? And so I just want to add that piece.
Thank you so much for sharing. And it looks like you, Del, it looked like you wanted to contribute to this part of the conversation.
I just want to give an example. So I teach a dual language course, and it's a Spanish language arts class. And essentially I have like these central themes throughout each unit that deal with Latin American country, so that all my students, at least the ones that I have, feel representative. There's some topic on Mexico, there's topics on like the Central America, the Caribbean, and sometimes when we're getting to those conversations, kids feel like they're at a crossroads, or there's like some sense of guilt because a lot of the history in Latin America deals with US imperialism or like involvement in these countries. So like in like the sense of identity, a lot of the kids are like, oh, we did this, and there's kind of a sense of guilt. So I really try to stop them and see it from an objective lens. And because a lot of the kids, when they talk about the history, they say, oh, we went into like Guatemala, or we did this, we did that. and really stop them. And this I learned from my political science background in college, to really distinguish who is the we and what is the US government. So like to make that, if they make that distinction, it lessens that sense of guilt that like somehow we're at fault for what's happening with immigration and so on, but really have it from a historical perspective, um, like distinguish that difference.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm now going to turn this over to Kelly, who has our next question.
Great, thank you. So a lot of us have been talking about kind of what we do in the classroom when we're planning lessons, how we're making these issues relevant to our curriculum and to our standards. But I'm really curious about how you approach social issue discussions when they're brought up organically. When you haven't pre-planned to discuss this with students and they come into your room because something happened or they read an article in English class about this topic. So I'm just curious, how do you approach it? And then does your approach change at all depending on the age group, the background, any other identity of your students? And I'd love to start with Lee, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I think it's important for kids to feel like they can bring those conversations organically to the classroom. I think a lot of it comes from on like the preparation side within not only your classroom, but if you think like bigger into the hallways, the school itself, and the climate that our community brings. I always encourage any kinds of conversations about, what's happening in the world. We watch, I don't know who else watches CNN 10, but we watch that every day with my seniors, just so they can kind of see what happens outside of Oklahoma City. A lot of our kids come from low income communities. And so oftentimes they see such a small, view within their communities. And so I always encourage those types of questions. I don't ever like to bring up, my personal views on what some kids might feel is controversial or whatever. I don't think in the South, really, it's never really big for us to kind of tell kids, at least in my experience as a Southern teacher, what those types of views are, because I want them to, create those thoughts for themselves, and kind of respect that because of their background, because of their identities, which oftentimes conflict with maybe their classmates or are intersectional with their classmates, they need to figure out how to navigate those thoughts rather than me, their teacher, who might not have the same identities, kind of preach to them instead.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really important. Is there anyone else who would like to go next for this question?
I want to say that I really like Lynn's, that's his name, correct? Lynn's point about not, Lee's, thank you. My apologies. Lee's point about not preaching to students, I think that's kind of like universal. But being a facilitator when you're having these kinds of discussions and letting them not necessarily take on a life of their own, because you don't want offense and aggression to get in the conversation, but honestly letting them genuinely unfold. Let students talk one to another more than they're talking to you. I also think it's a good practice to set the space for that tone, right? So if you know you're going to have a discussion, have students facing each other, make a circle, create a space where people know that it's a community oriented, because I think it's one thing to make certain types of assertions or statements when you're looking at the wall or when you're looking at a flag, but to say those in community when you're looking at other people's faces. First of all, sometimes that helps a lot with self-correction, because the students say things and they see the response of other students and they recognize that maybe that was not the best way to state it, or maybe it wasn't the best thing. So I think it's really important too, because then when those pop-up situations come up, because I have another entire class that I teach, an advisory class, then you have like a format for having these discussions already. So when students bring to me certain questions in advisory, I'm like, okay, circle up, circle up, talking stick, we know the drill. Let's go through this together. And I think that can be very helpful.
Yeah, I think you bring up an important point, Elenia. It's unrealistic to think that kids won't bring discussions up or social issues up. So it's really about thinking, how have you set your community? And what do you do when they do come up in the moment? Is there anyone else who would like to add on to this question?
I'll just say real quick, I appreciate that Elenia brought up about making caring common. And I think that's such an important phrase just in education in general, where we focus, yes, so much on like the standards and state tests and AP tests and all of this. But like, if we get back to like the basics of teaching children how to be members of their community, in ways that they can do that from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. This sense of creating this space for these types of conversations, if you put caring and empathy at the forefront, I think it allows for those organic conversations to not feel intimidating or stressful, especially in states where, down here where it's like, don't talk about that. Yeah, anyway, I just wanted to say I liked that phrase.
Yeah, thank you. Sharon, you had a comment?
Yeah, real quick. So again, for these unplanned conversations in my classroom, again, thinking that they're all language learners, and even if people are proficient English speakers, how easy it is to misunderstand and not to ensure that we are actually listening and hearing each other. In my spaces, it's even more profound. And so things that ensuring that before someone else, depending on what the situation is, if it's a larger thing or if it's between 2 or 3 students, I really try to ensure we have structures where kids are saying, this is what I heard, like repeating right back, this is what I heard you say. So in the moment, we're clarifying any misunderstandings due to language or otherwise. And then these are like very structured, whether it's sentence frames or sentence starters, but a very intentional way that in the moment, students can hear, whether it's a paraphrase back, so a kid saying whatever they need to, before that partner is able to give their opinion, right? And this may happen in the moment or during lunch or after school, depending on when things are less heated. They have to repeat back what they heard. Pause, then repeat, then get back, I heard, I think, this makes me feel. Any of those kinds of things, like Elenia said, are already embedded in the structure of what we do, but really trying to slow things down to ensure comprehensibility and that people are actually hearing each other, even if it doesn't end in an agreement. We at least have gotten a lot better at active listening. So.
Yeah, I think as teachers, some of those strategies that we keep in our back pocket that we know are tried and true are really helpful when these social issue discussions do come up. So thank you for that. Mark, would you like to add in?
Yeah, I mean, nothing too much, because I think people have certainly emphasized these in different ways. But I mean, I think in my classroom, we have a very formal, dedicated, every other Wednesday, big old conversation about something that's going on that relates back usually to something within government. And then I think, like Lee, I mean, we have a daily news story that we run off of NPR, or not NPR, PBS NewsHour. And in that format, I think, you are definitely, I mean, I don't have necessarily a bunch of questions or anything that they're doing that's really, really structured. We just learn to have a conversation about the news. So that, like today, when somebody decides before we get to PBS NewsHour that they want to know what the heck's going on up at Columbia University, I mean, we've really had plenty of practice in just kind of, having an unstructured conversation. And, at this point in the year, I'm really surprised seniors really have much to say at all. I mean, they're already gearing to get out of the building, but both the teacher moves and I would say the classroom environment is now firmly established that we can, one, allow me to try to explain what is going on, and then allow them to start joining in terms of what they're thinking. Today was entertaining because, a lot of them are headed to college, obviously, the next year, and find what's going on there, a little bit interesting, and in some cases kind of a little bit scary, in terms of what they may be walking into.
Yeah, thank you for that. I agree with you. I'm hearing a lot of common themes around building community and maintaining that community throughout the whole year to really support these conversations when they come up. Udell, did you want to do our final comment for this question?
That's something that helps me kind of diffuse a situation when things get heated. There's always a group of students that are very passionate about the topic and that will want to talk and talk and talk. I use like the step in, step out kind of method. So if at some point, if this is like your third time that you've shared something, to give the opportunity to those that haven't, especially those that are like the shy students, that sometimes they have something interesting to say or to contribute, and some students kind of lose track of that when they get caught up in the moment, and this helps them kind of bring them back and also become not just the speakers but the listeners, especially to give that space to those who maybe don't share a lot, but that they also feel like they're part of the conversation, they're part of the classroom, and their voice is heard.
Thank you. Yeah, I've heard some teachers also use like nonverbal ways of students engaging as well, whether it's be like a reflection before they speak, or something on big poster paper where students walk around the room responding to different comments people made. And I think inviting those kids who don't often share as much into the conversation is really important. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to turn it back over to Carrie.
Thank you, Kelly. This actually brings us to our final question for the panelists. And so if we think back to the definition that was presented a little earlier in the webinar, our definition of bridging is any individual who is dedicated to creating bridges, whether it be through facilitating dialogue across differences or helping to develop positive intergroup relationships across divides. And with that definition in mind, a couple of questions for you, the panelists, to consider. As you think about yourself, are you comfortable seeing yourself in the role of a bridge builder? If you are, how has this perspective impacted your teaching practice? And if you're hesitant, if not, what else that hasn't already been discussed by the panelists would help in facilitating that support in creating bridging within your school? And I'll open that up to any of the panelists.
So I can say for myself, even though I teach in Baltimore City, I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. I went to T.C. Williams, the school formerly known is now Alexandria City High School. They changed the name because T.C. Williams was a segregationist. And I grew up, it's right outside of DC. It was very diverse, like over 200 countries represented in our school, and not just racially, but also socioeconomically, because there was only one high school and it's a very large city. So every student went there. There was one high school, one private school, but for the most part, people went to the public school. So I say that to say that I have the biggest kumbaya heart when it comes to America. Like I grew up with a lot of diversity and really believing in the American dream and thinking that that's what our entire nation looked like. And then traveling and getting kind of shocked at the fact that that wasn't necessarily what it was. So as a result, I'm actually very comfortable being a bridge builder because I still have that dream where we can all coexist and love one another and appreciate each other's different cultures and background without having to negate or neglect our own. We don't necessarily have to assimilate in order to make that work. So I'm very comfortable with it. I still hold on to it near and dear. It's funny because when I went to my high school reunion, it was like, I'm the class of 1999. So in 2019, we went to my reunion. I was like, man, this is what it's supposed to be like. So, and I took all the pictures in the world. I brought them all back. I showed them to my students. I showed them to the staff. I showed them to everybody. Like, this is how I grew up. Just because when you are able to do that, it's so beautiful and it's so affirming and it's so connecting. And I still really believe in harmony. So I have no problem being a bridge builder. I will say, though, it does come with its senses of sacrifices because everybody doesn't share that dream. So sometimes people can mistake your passion for aloofness, or I had a person tell me I have lofty ideals, which I was a little offended, but then I was like, you know what, actually maybe so compared to you. I do have that. So I'm very comfortable with it, but I do understand that it comes with sacrifice. It comes with patience. It's not easy. And it is just that it's a dream. It's not where we are right now, but it's definitely where I want my students and future generations to be.
Elenia, thank you so much for sharing that. That is such a fantastic assessment of what it can look like to be a bridge builder. And I could not agree more that it takes work, it takes time. And I'm curious if any of our other panelists would like to share what they're thinking about their role as a bridge builder or what additional supports they might be needing right now.
I can relate to the previous conversation, and I can say that I see myself to be a bridge builder, mostly because I'm the person who was not born and raised in the United States and had a totally different idea and view how this country works. And since I moved in, I was in higher education, academia, research, then in school environment. I think I'm a person who sees how the world sees the United States and how United States is really, and how the social issues are addressed here and what's happening. And because I have this international background, I am from European part of the world, and I bring all my background information to the classroom with me, willing or not. So I'm pretty much a person that thinks a little bit differently because I grew up in a different environment in a very mono-ethnic country while I live and work with diverse population. And I think our students really want to see themselves in me because they are also born and raised in different countries, my MLL students. And so I think I am the symbol of hope that a person can get a doctorate in a foreign country and speak 4 languages. And I think that's very important. I feel myself very loved, pampered, and being in the school environment, especially high school, when kids are trying to form ideas where they want to go, what they want to do. I think I see myself doing this job and, as we say, carrying this cross of building relationship across the community, because the school is the biggest part of our community in rural areas. That's especially the place where people learn about the world outside of their lives and their bubbles.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And do we have any other panelists who want to share their thoughts on their role as a bridge builder? Udal, I see your hand. Do you want to join us in the conversation?
I wanted to say that for me, it takes time, it takes patience, and just building the rapport. So maybe the first few months, I don't feel as, I don't want to say competent, but as confident in being a bridge builder. But once I get to know the kids, their identity, their backgrounds, and what they're interested in, and how they fit into the world, because I teach middle and high school, so it's a little bit different. With the high school, they're still figuring out what the role is in society and what they want to do with their lives. Whereas with middle school, they're a little bit more thinking about, their friends and how they relate to each other. So I think for me, prior to having these conversations, building that rapport with them is essential, and it takes time. And like I have to remind myself to give myself grace when we get to that point, and I'm not as confident. of how to, bridge those conversations initially, but eventually we get to that point as we, kids are more confident and throughout the year as they're growing, and also they're more comfortable in the spaces that they're in.
Yutel, thank you so much for sharing. And then we'd love to hear from Sharon, who's going to bring us to the close of this portion of our panelist discussion.
Elaine, when you said before that you were from a really diverse high school and you were surprised when you step out, I just say I'm originally from New Jersey, growing up about 15 miles outside of New York City. And so I've only been here in Colorado about 15 years, and it was a huge culture shock coming from that area of the East Coast and just being used to seeing all the flavors, and then coming here, and there's some, but not nearly as much, and which means the mindsets of teachers are really different. And so for me in my role, where I'm half in the classroom and then half my job is to really supporting other teachers and ensuring that I shouldn't even say my students, our students are getting what they need. But that's that bridge, is that I still see those kiddos, those MLs, as my students. Well, other teachers see that as well. And so that bridge of no, this 9th grade kiddo or this 10th grader who's trying to learn science or math, that's your student, actually. And so how can we, so that bridge, and I think about, is both that comprehensible input output I spoke about before, that bridge. Some teachers, even if they have the most positive mindset, whatever that might be, they're afraid, especially our newcomer students, where they don't quite know, oh my God, well, they have to be proficient in English before the end of the year and they have to hit all the 9th grade. No. I love that mindset, but let's talk about content and language together, or the opposite, which is, I don't think we have to go into details, just the mindset that is not helpful to ensuring that students feel seen and heard. So for me, that bridge is really both on a practical level of, hey, you've never worked with an interpreter before. Great. Let's make that happen. You want to know something about a student? Let's talk to their family in the way that we would with any other student. And let's not have that language piece be a barrier. And then my students feeling most comfortable with me, because that's just the role that ESL teachers get to play in general. How do I then bridge them that comfort and that space that I've created in my room that may not be in others? How am I then a bridge to ensure that teachers in other spaces know what these kids can do? And how do I make that visible, both for our kids when they're in my space to kind of speak up and speak out when they're in other spaces, but also for those teachers to see that there's a lot more to these students than just maybe their lack of English proficiency at the moment.
Awesome. Sharon, thank you so much. And truly thank you to all of the panelists for your willingness to share in responses to the questions. You have most definitely provided some very thoughtful information, and I'm sure for all those who are listening, you've given some insight as to what it can look like to be a bridge builder. We're going to turn it over now to Milena, who's going to talk a little more about the toolkit.
Thank you so much. Wow, so that was really rich. Thank you all so much for such a wonderful discussion. And it really does echo what we heard from our educators, which is any researcher's dream, to see replication of findings. So that said, last year, we did a number of focus groups with more than 24 educators to conduct
Looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. I will continue while Milena hops back on. So last year, she was saying we spoke to about a little over 2,000 educators across the country. I mentioned earlier about 19 different states. And as you can see on our panel, a huge diversity in locations. While we were conducting this research, we realized that the resources were just not there. So we're going to share some of the themes that we heard from this, from our educators, but you're going to find a lot more detail in our toolkit, of course. But basically, we ask questions like, how do topics or social issue discussions come up? If at all, what are your biggest challenges and what works well? Which is similar to what you heard this evening. So the 4 main themes that we heard are the first, For the first theme, how topics arise, we found that educators described a mix of spontaneous and planned topics that would come up through all educators that would come up, and all educators agreed that students come to school with questions and many conversations just happen organically. Many emphasize that the extent to which issues are discussed depends on the school and community ecology, so the school size or the intergroup dynamics. The second theme was about teachers' goals when navigating conversations, and we found that the vast majority simply wanted to be responsive to student wishes for discussion, and they want what many caregivers want to support students in cultivating essential life skills, including critical thinking, listening, and perspective taking, and the ability to disagree and still be friends with someone, grappling with tensions like how much of themselves to reveal or how much to challenge students came up very often. And I think Milena's back on, so I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Hi, thanks, Juanita, for taking over. I don't know what happened there. My computer just cut out. I think we're on the third theme. Yes. So the third one was around external challenges and barriers that teachers encounter most often. And the majority shared frustrations that the schools provide no clear or consistent guidance. It was interesting that many emphasized encouragement to have conversations isn't the same as support. And although actual caregiver backlash rarely came up, many teachers voiced fears about offending caregivers or parents getting upset if they heard what their kids may have been talking about, often without any context. And finally, the fourth theme was about teachers' own best practices. So they shared a number of strategies and practices that work for them, including being prepared, building authentic relationships and skills. Norm setting was a big one. Having empathy for their students, and having compassion for themselves as educators, right? Like really building up their confidence to do the work and to practice bridging. I heard practice quite a bit in the panel, and that really did come up a lot. Also specific techniques included things like depersonalizing debates, reflection, post-journaling, nonverbal forms of communication that was also mentioned, and taking it back to the curriculum, right? Very much like what Elena mentioned about going back to the standards. So with that, with all those wonderful learnings, we developed this toolkit in direct response to what we heard and the themes learned. So, educators voiced the need for school guidance and a comprehensive resource. And so we really hope that this toolkit delivers that. Specifically, it was really cool to see how the themes mapped onto an existing framework out there by Judy Pace. And we just added to that to make it more of a scope and sequence and to really help educators step by step in this really important but difficult work, right? So in our toolkit, we lay it out with phases, general strategies, and key resources. So some of the resources we created, many of them we pulled from existing ones. The idea being to put all resources in one place so that teachers don't have to search and wonder how to implement what and when, right? So here, can you go back to the table? Yeah, just want to describe that real quick. You can see that we proposed 3 key phases of work, and the bullets under each one for bridging with students, administrators, caregivers, they're all meant to be the general strategies for which we then provide key resources in the toolkit itself. So the main takeaway here is that before, we even jump into the bridging, like the really tough work of having those discussions, it's really important to prepare and to cultivate the foundational skills and trusting relationships. And we acknowledge, right? We do acknowledge in the toolkit too that bridging can and will occur at any time. There's no easy sequence or neat formula for how to connect across difference. But this is our attempt at just providing a comprehensive framework all in one place that can really guide teachers and how they think about bridge building, not just with students, but also administrators and caregivers. And so now onto the next slide as a little teaser. Here's one quick glimpse into what you can find in the toolkit by phase, strategy, and key resources for that strategy. So in the main section of the toolkit, bridge building with students, the second phase that we propose is to build relationships and skills, right? And one of the big strategies for this is to build student skills. And we wanted to focus our recommendations on the skills and resources we thought are most practical, of high quality, and also highly needed for bridging. So as you can see, and I really love, someone mentioned loving the phrase making caring common. It's a phrase, it's also our organization. And we do have a lot of those specific resources around building empathy and compassion, which is why we recommend them in that section. Resources for developing empathy, compassion, but also media literacy skills, for example. And so, yeah, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Milena. And again, huge thank you to all of the panelists, not only for all of the work that, all of the sharing that you did tonight, but for all of the work that you're obviously doing in your classrooms. It is inspiring to hear that this is happening. That said, I want to highlight something that's a little bit separate, but very much connected to the conversation this evening before we get into the actual toolkit. The Darcy E. Ricci Teacher Courage Award is an award honoring my former boss, mentor, and friend. She's a former GC staff member that passed away just 2 years ago from cancer. But she was a powerhouse in terms of uplifting teacher voices and centering equity in all of the conversations that we had. It's an award of $10,000, so that's a good chunk of change. It is unrestricted. And eligible teachers, as you can see here, are actively teaching in the United States middle and high school, anything related to US Gov, history, social studies, any of those. And there is a QR code there if you want to scan it. But if you Google the Darcy Ritchie Teacher Courage Award, you can find the link is there as well. And without much further ado, again, a huge thank you to everyone. I also want to thank two folks that did a lot of work on this project as well, Eric Torres and Jasmine Johnson. They're both PhD students, one at Harvard and the other at Fordham University. And they were critical to the work that we were doing, to you all, the panelists, and to all of the focus group participants, and to our generous funder, New Pluralists, who uplifts the work that we're doing. So if you grab your phone right now, there is a QR code, and on here, you're going to fill out a quick survey of how you thought this evening went, and you will receive an email with the link to the toolkit. If you don't have your phone handy, I am going to drop this in the chat for everyone to complete. And if you are here today, you have my email address because I sent you all the invite. So feel free to reach out if you have any issues with this or have any other questions. In the toolkit, we've also embedded a survey. So after you've perused the full survey, we would love to hear your thoughts, especially our educators. The goal is to have this be a living document. So periodically we'll go back in and update resources, share more highlights. And also we met with some rural educators specifically last week. So we're going to be embedding highlights and themes from that conversation. So it's a resource that you should bookmark and continue to come back to because there will be periodic updates. With that said, again, thank you folks. We really appreciate your time this evening. I will stick around for another minute or so just so folks can complete the survey and download that toolkit. But otherwise, have a great, what's today, Wednesday evening.